Now that we've seen how the two policies may interact with each other, the policies we've been talking about, fiscal and monetary, I think it's important to realize there are a couple of other policies too that governments may use, and to think about how those affect the economy. And then we'll move on and we'll try to put them all together and see what's happening in different economies in the world. But there are these other two policies that we need to discuss. Remember, at the very beginning of this course, we said the government really doesn't have a lot of tools to influence the economy. The economy is a big, very decentralized, profit-driven or satisfaction-driven organism, right? And the government comes in there and has a little bit of influence in some areas, but not a lot. We said it only had 4 tools. So one that we've discussed is fiscal, the other is monetary, and you know all about those. There are 2 more, which are the exchange rate and structural policies. So let's just devote a few minutes now to talking about each of those so we can see why they may also have an effect on the economy and how authorities might think about them as they're using the policies we're most familiar with, fiscal and monetary. The first one, the exchange rate policy, simply involves a movement in the value of the currency. And I'm going to use that term rather than exchange rate for technical reasons. Anyway, we'll be talking about how the currency may go up in value or it may go down in value. Now, the interest rate has an influence on the value of the currency. And so sometimes governments will move the interest rate in order to move the currency. Let's just walk through this a little bit so you can see why this would happen and why it might make monetary policy live sort of in internal conflict. So when the interest rate moves, the demand for a currency will change. Now, if we take our normal supply and demand diagram that we've thought about from the beginning of this course, we can put the price of the currency on the vertical axis, and we can put on the horizontal axis the quantity of the currency. And then you draw a demand curve for the currency, which slopes downward, as most good demand curves do. And then we have a supply curve for the currency that slopes upward. So it looks a little bit like our money market supply and demand diagram we drew a couple of sessions ago. But the supply curve actually goes up. It slopes up. It's not vertical. Because in the case of the money markets, that was a curve set by the central bank. In this case, it's independent people deciding whether or not to buy a currency for or sell a currency for their needs, right? So when we take these 2 curves, we find an equilibrium. That will be the value of the currency on international markets. We call it the exchange rate. That's the price of this currency. When you go to a foreign currency market to buy it or sell it, this is the price you get, right? So imagine that the government, let's say, raises the interest rate. That would be a restrictive monetary policy. Imagine that they raise it, all right? Now, some of the people who demand currency are foreign investors, all right? And those foreign investors, when they see the interest rate go up, they may say to themselves, oh, I would like to take my savings and put them in this country instead of mine because I can earn a higher interest rate on my investments, okay? So what happens when the interest rate rises is that money is attracted to the country with a higher interest rate and the demand curve for the currency rises. Now, if you're drawing this or if you're looking at the graph, when the demand curve for the currency rises, you can see that its value rises, okay? So what happens is the government has raised interest rates, or the central bank has raised interest rates. We know that this will affect investment, but at the same time, it's likely that it will affect the value of the currency by raising it. All right? What happens when the currency goes up in value? Well, just think through the whole business of exports and imports, and you can see this very clearly and intuitively. When a currency goes up in value, what's going to happen is that your country's exports, when they leave your borders and go into other countries, suddenly they have a higher price in those foreign markets, right? Because you have to translate your stronger currency into that foreign currency. So what will happen is you will be able to export less with that stronger currency. So we could say exports would go down. At the same time, since your currency is strong, when imports come in, they come in at a level that looks cheap to you, at a price level that looks cheap to you. So we're going to encourage people to import more because imports have become cheaper. So what will happen is exports go up, exports go down, imports go up, and that X minus M component of aggregate demand, the whole thing goes down. So aggregate demand actually shifts inward to the left because net exports have declined. So you can see that a rise in the value of your currency is like a restrictive policy for the economy. All right? It slows it down, and at the same time, if you think about the fact that those imports are coming in to your economy at a lower price, this is going to help you with inflation. Imagine that one of your big imports is petroleum, all right? And it comes into your country now at a lower price. The whole economy is going to benefit from the lower energy prices. So when the currency increases in value, your economy will slow down, inflation will slow down. It's a restrictive policy, okay? And remember, that can be set in motion by an increase in interest rates. So what we see, we put these together, we see that a rise in interest rates is restrictive if it's a monetary policy. If the interest rates rise and affect the currency, that's also a restrictive policy. So these two reinforce each other, all right? But imagine that a government, a central bank, is trying to think about what's best for the economy, all right? And they know there's an inflationary situation going on, but they also want the economy to grow. And they're trying to decide what to do, all right? So they raise interest rates for their restrictive monetary policy. Those higher interest rates are going to spill over into the exchange rate, all right? And they're going to make it easier to control inflation. That's good news, all right? They're trying to control inflation to begin with. It becomes easier to control inflation because imported goods come in at a lower price. At the same time, it's going to become harder for your companies to export. And often companies will be very unhappy, all right? The economy is slowing down. They're saying we can't sell anymore. And so you're going to find yourself in this kind of conflict. And sometimes the monetary authority will turn around and say, okay, well, I guess I need to cut interest rates because I want to help the exporters. Then you're actually doing an expansive policy for your economy. You were trying to fight inflation. That wasn't exactly what you wanted, but you helped the exporters. So we see situations, for example, in Brazil in recent months where you're trying to think, what is the central bank thinking? And you realize that what's going on is that they're caught between their desire to cool off the economy and their desire to help their exporters to continue to keep their place in foreign markets. So it's important to understand how this exchange rate policy works. Now let's take it in the opposite direction. And it's going to work exactly the same, but all the arrows move the other way. So let's imagine the central bank cuts interest rates. All right. Now, those lower interest rates would feed through to more demand in the economy. That's an expansive policy to cure a recessionary gap. But when they cut those interest rates, again, foreign investors operating in this foreign currency market will say, you know what, those interest rates are kind of low. I think I'll take my money out of that foreign country and bring it home because interest rates are better here. Okay? In the foreign currency market, demand for the currency declines. All right? And if you're looking at the graph or you're drawing the graph, you see demand declines, all of the things remaining equal, the value of the currency falls. So if we work through the chain of events, I cut interest rates, the value of the currency falls. So what happens to my exports and my imports? Well, the value of my currency has fallen, so suddenly my export goods are doing very well in foreign markets, right? Because they come out at a lower price when I translate them to the foreign currency. Exporters are going to be happy. We're going to have more aggregate demand thanks to the exports, and GDP will pick up. At the same time, my currency has fallen in value. The imports look expensive to my consumers. And so they are going to import less, all right? So exports go up, imports go down. This X minus M element in aggregate demand goes up net, and we've given a stimulus to GDP. So we were looking for an expansive policy. We cut interest rates. That fed through the investment mechanism, raised aggregate demand. But at the same time, it fed through currency markets. And it also raised aggregate demand because we're exporting more, importing less. Remember, though, that when my currency has fallen, those imports look more expensive to me. And if I have to buy them, such as petroleum, okay, or maybe capital equipment, something I have to get from foreign countries, then inflation is going to go up. Okay, so we have an extra added inflation, we call it imported inflation in this situation. So again, you see the contradiction for the central bank. They're looking at the economy, they're saying, recessionary gap, I need to cut interest rates. They cut interest rates, that feeds itself through investment and also through the currency market, and it's good. They're getting a boost in aggregate demand from both sides, reinforcing policies. But inflation goes up pretty substantially because of that imported inflation effect. So again, they might find themselves saying, wait a minute, I wanted to expand the economy, but here I sit with this high inflation, I'm going to reverse my policy. So it helps to understand how exchange rate markets work and how interest rates influence them to see how this different tool can cause our monetary authorities to sometimes be torn between two different objectives.